AM 650 presents You and the Law, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of You and the Law. It's a pleasure to welcome back to our studios Scott Stanley and Kevin Gourlay from the law firm Murphy Batista here in Vancouver. Gentlemen, good to see you again.
Good to be here.
Scott, tell us a little bit about Murphy Batista before we get to some of the nuts and bolts of insurance law and claims and winning and losing. Tell us about your firm.
Sure. Murphy Batista started in 1982, and my two partners, Joe Murphy and Joe Batista, went out on their own and set up a humble little firm. They were two lawyers. They were two secretaries. They rented a little space in a downtown firm, and many years later, we're 12 lawyers and approaching 50 support staff.
In downtown Vancouver?
Downtown Vancouver. We have one of the floors in one of the big buildings now. We've grown that big.
And Kevin, you represent not only Vancouver clients, but people from the island, from all around the province, and indeed you have international clients as well.
Yeah, probably about 60 or 65% of our clients are in the Lower Mainland, but we have clients all around the province, clients back east in Ontario, and clients around the world. And
the only work that Murphy Batista does, Scott, is against insurance companies, correct?
It's God's work, yes.
And I should also point out, for the record, that both my guests, both Scott and Kevin, have, in their younger post-law school days, worked for the insurance industry, so you have a real solid understanding of how that team plays their game.
I think we do. The only way I think you can really learn insurance law is to work at a firm where you're doing nothing but that. And most of that good training comes from the firms that represent insurance companies.
And Kevin, your clients are people who have claims against insurance companies and who, for whatever reason, have had those claims denied. Is that the basic reason anyone comes to the front door of Murphy Batista?
Yeah, so we do claims for people that have been injured in accidents, and then we do insurance claims for people who have been denied coverage. For example, your house burns down or you have a flood and the insurance company refuses to pay. You're disabled and you can't work and the insurance company doesn't agree and says, no, you should just go back to work. So those are the kind of people that come to us for assistance.
Scott, this seems like a kind of a silly question perhaps, but I mean it sincerely. Do we need insurance? I mean, really, do we need insurance, or is this a massive scam?
We would live in absolute chaos if we didn't have insurance.
Okay.
We would. We would have no certainty. We wouldn't have anything to fall back on and protect us. And so we absolutely do need insurance. We wouldn't want to live in a world. And one of the signs of a civilized society is the presence or absence of insurance. And we do want it. But we want it to be fair. And a lot of insurance is sold by private companies. They're there to make a buck.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to make a buck, but we want them to make a fair buck. We don't want them to make a buck by denying claims that ought to have been paid. We want them to make a buck because they were smart business people.
Well, ideally, and if you look at the balance sheet of any insurance company, Kevin, they should be taking in more in premiums every year than they pay out in claims. That seems pretty rudimentary, right?
It is, but they're massive entities, and much of their income historically comes from their investment. They take your money from premiums and they invest it and make money that way. The market's been more difficult in the last few years, so some of their revenues have gone down, mostly because of falling investments rather than more claims or lesser premiums.
Interesting stuff. Now, Scott, you said we need insurance. Do we need all the insurance they're trying to sell us every year? Obviously, you can't drive a car in British Columbia unless you have insurance. Generally, we like to have life insurance just in case. Got to look after the family. But are there types of insurance out there that the industry would have us believe, boy, you can't have a good life without this stuff, that really are unnecessary or not practical or not required?
I think there certainly are types of insurance that people buy that they don't need. Look, one of the strongest emotions that people have is fear, and people will spend a lot of money to beat back fear, whether it's their kids, themselves. They'll spend money on that, and insurance is one of those things where it's driven by emotion. And a lot of the ads you see to buy insurance, you're left with the impression that you're going to be kept safe, you're going to be protected.
Sure.
But the reality of it is you don't get blanket coverage when you buy insurance. You buy a very specific policy that says what you get, or more importantly, what you don't get. And some of these policies, if people were actually if they were actually able to read them, I mean, and they're very hard to read and understand, even if you were inclined to read them. When you look at it, you're buying something that'll almost never pay out. In some cases, and not in all cases. In the minority of cases, that does happen, where you're buying a policy that'll never pay out. The worst are the accidental death and dismemberment policies, where they say if you lose your right finger and your left leg, you're entitled to X number of dollars.
Oh yeah, and it's all spelled out. The body parts are itemized with a dollar figure attached to them.
But you almost have to lose them in conjunction with one another.
I remember that from school. We used to have that even in grade school. Your parents had to get that in, and it was right there on the list. You lose a hand, it's worth X number of $100. That's still around.
But do you know how hard it is for a kid to lose a hand on a playground?
Yeah.
It almost never happens. So do they need that insurance?
There was a terrible incident recently, a young man who was badly injured playing hockey, had a traumatic brain injury, and there was a coverage issue. The Hockey Association had bought a policy whereby kids would get, I don't know the exact numbers, but if you lost both feet, you would get $100,000, things like that.
Right.
But there was no coverage for brain injuries, which is the vast majority of what kids are going to be in danger of if they get in a hockey accident. So I think the answer is that you need to get the right coverage. You don't always just need more coverage or more policies, but you need to make sure that what you have is right for you.
Well, that's really interesting. I've put 2 boys through minor hockey in British Columbia, and we were assured by the association every year, because you pay this fee, and you pay for your ice time and uniforms and all the rest of it, but part of the fee is for a group insurance policy that your boys are covered under while they're playing hockey. And you sign on the dotted line, and you pony up the dough, and you forget about it. Great, I can relax. No matter what happens to Junior, we're okay here. We're insured. But if there's a brain injury involved, that may not be the case, Kevin.
You don't know. You have to look at your policy. And that's the thing. People think either I have insurance or I don't have insurance. And the question is, do you have the insurance you need?
So, Scott, if I'm a parent and I've got a kid in a sports league of any kind that requires some kind of participation in a group policy, it's not an unreasonable thing for me, the parent, to go, can I see the language of that policy, please, before you get my money?
You're absolutely entitled to see that. And they should request that, because in 100 years of history of hockey in Canada, how many hockey players have lost 2 feet at the same time playing hockey?
Right. Yeah.
Conversely, how many people have sustained a concussion?
Right.
So no, you definitely should look at that. I mean, Sterling, one of the worst cases of a silly policy I've ever seen was a travel insurance policy. This fellow had bought a policy, not in Canada, but he bought it overseas, and he came to Canada for a holiday. He had an accident. He had a few drinks earlier in the day. It had nothing to do with the fact that his appendix burst. And the insurance company wouldn't pay, because it says in the fine letter, the black little print that no one reads,
right,
if you've had any alcohol in a 24-hour period before the accident, we don't cover you no matter what. Well, who would buy that policy for a holiday? Who's not going to have a beer when
they're on holidays, for crying out loud? Goodness
Yeah.
gracious, if you can't have a beer on holidays, hang it up. It's not going to happen. So isn't that interesting that a vacation travel insurance policy would include a clause that says we're not going to pay anything if you're drinking? That's crazy.
It is. I haven't seen that in a Canadian policy. This is a fellow from Ireland.
Right. If it's a foreign company, but still the nerve of the company, I guess you have to say, at the bottom line, you represent yourself as being, well, we'll get you covered when you travel overseas. We've got your back here. Unless, of course, you want to have a beer while you're traveling.
But something closer to home with disability policies, a lot of professional disability policies, accountants, lawyers, doctors, they pay a lot of money for these things, and they pay out if they're disabled from working as in their profession, and that's the expectation. But when you look at a lot of these policies, they only pay out if you're unable to do every aspect of your job.
Right.
And
right.
that almost never happens.
So if you're still partially capable of fending for yourself in the workplace, but of course you can't do your original job, so you can't make the same dough, but you can make a living, maybe your claim is going to be denied.
You could be a surgeon who needs to stand to do their job, and
Right.
they need to have their eyesight. You could lose your eyesight but still be able to stand and technically not qualify for coverage under your disability policy. That's silly.
Yeah, it is. Well, let's talk about Murphy Batista, guys, because your company deals with people who are on the other side of the insurance business, which is they've had a claim, they've bought insurance, they thought they were covered, they put their claim forward when something bad happened to them, and for whatever reason, the insurance company has said no. And so the only recourse they have, because they feel, wait a second here, just a cotton-picking minute, I'm going to get a lawyer. And off they go downtown to see you guys at Murphy Batista. What is the single greatest reason, Kevin, for denial of claim?
Probably the most common thing we see is what the insurance company will call misrepresentation, that the person with the insurance contract said something incorrect, and they might not have even understood it to be incorrect. For example, I just had to buy life insurance for myself because I just had a child.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How old is this person?
She's 7 weeks now.
That's great. And I've been there too. When we had our first, a daughter as well, off to the insurance broker I went.
Yep.
My life has just changed. I better change my insurance. So tell us the story. This is interesting.
So I go to buy insurance, and I meet with the insurance company representative, and he's got a questionnaire, and we sit down together and we fill it out. And he's asking me all these questions and ticking off boxes. And I, of course, do everything I can to be truthful and answer the questions he's asking me correctly. At the end, he asked me to sign the form, and being in my profession, I read...
Being a lawyer, you're not about to sign anything until you actually scan it first,
I read
right?
through it, yeah,
Okay.
which I suspect too often people don't.
Right.
And the questions that he had been asking me weren't the exact same questions that were on the form.
Seriously.
So, for example, he asked me if I smoke, and I don't, and I said no. But then I look at the form, and the question was, have you ever smoked? Well, I did when I was young. So if I hadn't read that, I would be misrepresenting the facts to the insurance company. If I then died, and the insurance company goes and looks at that form and finds out that I used to smoke, they could say that I had made a material misrepresentation and deny my family those benefits. And I wouldn't be around to say, no, he had asked me a different question.
Right.
So you have to be careful when you're buying your insurance that you're being not only honest, you have to go beyond that and make sure that they're not taking down the wrong information.
Right, and so this is about disclosure then, is if you're going to buy insurance, Scott, you've got to disclose the realities of your life. And, you know, even if it's an embarrassing bit of medical history or something like that, and you're buying travel insurance, you could have a travel insurance claim denied in a foreign jurisdiction because you didn't indicate that maybe you were diabetic or something like that when you bought the insurance at home here in Canada before you left.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not enough just to be honest. I mean, people make honest mistakes all the time, but an honest mistake is enough to invalidate your insurance coverage. You have to be more than honest. You have to be accurate. You can't just use best efforts. You have to be completely accurate on these forms. Otherwise, you risk the insurance company taking the very correct and lawful position that the information was not provided, and they made a bad business decision based upon misinformation you provided them. And quite frankly, I think the insurance companies are happy to have people make these mistakes because it's a win-win situation. They sell you the policy, they get your money, they never have to pay out. Mm-hmm. If you have to go and pay them, or if you have to make a claim, they can turn around and say, well, the insurance was valid or invalid from the get-go, but here's your money back. But it's a win-win for the insurance companies when you make these mistakes.
All right, now, Kevin, let me use, if you don't mind, let me use your personal circumstances as a case example here. Okay, so your broker, when you bought the insurance policy, you were asked a series of questions, and the guy sat on the other side of the desk in a clipboard, and he was tick, 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 tick as he's going down a list, and you're being as honest and upfront as you can, and he says, do you smoke? And you say, no, I don't. And he moves on to the next question. And so later, there's a claim for that life insurance, and you're not with us anymore, but your beneficiaries are going to be denied a claim because the insurance company can say, Scott, legally, that man he misrepresented himself. He signed that the question was different on paper than the question that the broker asked you. And you responded, the broker said, do you smoke? You said, no. Next question, and off you went. You, being a lawyer, double-checked the broker's work and discovered there was a little lacking and went back. But if the broker says, do you smoke? And you say, no, and you move on, and eventually it comes around where the insurance company says, person said he told us he doesn't smoke or never smoked. And that was the question on paper. Have you ever smoked? That was not the question you were asked. So Scott is the broker, the person who is you're going to go after as the lawyer for the family who is now out in the cold because the broker didn't ask the question on the form.
Unless Kevin actually recorded the conversation with the broker, there would be no point in pursuing that, because the broker would probably say, look, I can't remember. I sold this policy 10, 15 years ago.
Uh-oh.
I'm just guided by what's on the form. Mr. Gourlay signed the form, so therefore there's no claim. So
I checked the box, so clearly there was a response to my question, and oh boy.
Checking one box wrong would invalidate that family from the much-needed coverage they need.
Wow.
Just one little check on a box.
So, okay, but here we are. We're civilians. Now, you guys are lawyers, but those of us listening, and yours truly, we're civilians. We don't know about this stuff. If we're in our insurance agent's office, they're on the other side of the desk. We're buying a policy. Okay, now we have to go through a few questions here before I can sell you this policy. Fine, I expected that. So you answer the series of questions, sign here, and you're now insured. I sign. I feel that I'm covered. I can relax and enjoy peace of mind. But I didn't know, Scott. He didn't ask me the questions that were on the flippin' form. So now I'm out in the dark, penniless, and so are my dependents.
Well, you have no coverage, but you're actually paying $50-$60 a month for something that's not going to be valid.
That's amazing. Need to take a break here on this rather shocking revelation, and it's only the first segment of this edition of You and the Law here on AM 650. Scott Stanley and Kevin Gourlay from Murphy Batista in studio. Lots more straight ahead.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is You and the Law on AM 650.